Hey there, I'm Kat, and this is Brews and Reviews. So if you were here throughout February, you'll know that I was taking part in the Booktube games, and I was on Team Derry, and I was dedicating my month to trying to read as much as possible. And I definitely think I read as much as I could have read throughout the month. I actually ended up reading 25 books for a total of 10,241 pages. So I feel like I contributed to Team Derry and I'm proud of myself. So given that I did read 25 books, this wrap up is going to be large. So I'm going to do what I did within January, and I actually split my wrap up into two, so I'm going to do that this time. And I will try to be as brief as I possibly can about the books that I read. So without further ado, let's get going. The first book that I read throughout February was The Terror by Dan Simmons. Now, this is a book set in like the 1800s about 3 ships that go to try and find the North Atlantic Circle, something that doesn't exist that people in the 1800s thought did, so they kept trying to find a route to take ships down, basically. So, the ships get stuck in the ice, and a lot of people start dying because the Arctic is not, a hospitable place. It also doesn't help that there's a giant monster killing everyone at the same time. So this book features a lot of death, a lot of horror, and a lot of scurvy, which, oh my god, is terrifying, and I never want to have scurvy, and I had to go out and buy some fruit juice just to, feel better about the fact that I'm not going to get scurvy. Because it's terrifying. You bleed from your hair follicles. It's not nice. So anyway, I really enjoyed this book. I actually give it 5 out of 5 stars. It's huge, but if you can look past the size of it, it's like 900 something pages long. If you can get past the size of it, it's really worth it. The horror in it is something that I haven't really found rivaled in many other things. Obviously, you have to discount Stephen King there because, he's like horror king. But I really enjoyed like the tone and how it just makes you feel cold and like you're in a desolate, abandoned place and there's just no hope. It's a really good book. If you haven't heard of it, definitely check it out. And also I hear there's a TV series that I definitely need to check out because I want to see how it's done. The second book that I picked up was an audiobook, and that was The Shining by Stephen King. Clearly, I was in some kind of mood when I started the Booktube games because I wanted horror and horror and horror. I've seen the film of The Shining and I really enjoyed it. I thought the atmosphere was great. And though the book is really different, I really enjoyed the book as well. The book follows a family where the dad gets a job to be like the caretaker of the Overlook Hotel in the winter, so their family will be the only people who are actually in the hotel, and like weird shit happens. I mean, I'm sure you know what The Shining is about, so I don't really have to go into that much detail. I really enjoyed it. I also really enjoyed how Jack Torrance is portrayed, so you can kind of understand his thought process and see where he's coming from and see where things go slightly wrong for him, and that just keeps going further and further, and it's really well done. I really enjoyed it, and I didn't feel like it went on for too long. Like some of Stephen King's books are a little bit waffly, and go off on tangents, but I actually really liked the conciseness of The Shining, so that was fun. So the next 3 books that I read were Shadow and Bone, Siege and Storm, and Ruin and Rising, because just a whore for this series, aren't I really? I love this series so much, and no one will ever convince me otherwise. The Grishaverse is something that I really love being in, even when Mal's there, because he's a shit. Particularly in Siege and Storm, he's just a horrible human. I hate Mal so much. I also love The Darkling, which I know not everyone agrees with, but I can't help it. I can't help it. If you don't know, which you probably do, given that Booktube likes to talk about these books, probably 1 in every 4 videos. They're set in a Russian-themed fantasy world where a bunch of people called the Grisha have sort of elemental or type powers, and there's other type powers that they have. There is like a giant rift in the land called the Unsea, which is where hundreds of years ago the Darkling at the time covered the land in darkness by accident, and everybody's sort of suffering from that. And that is where Shadow and Bone starts, and then it just continues in a way that I'm not going to tell you, because if you haven't read it, then no spoilers. So the next book that I picked up was the group book for Team Derry, and that was Renegades by Marissa Meyer. This is the first Marissa Meyer book I've picked up since the Lunar Chronicles, because I heard Heartless was a bit meh, so I didn't pick it up. And yeah, it was alright. I found this book okay. It's about superheroes and supervillains, set in a world where the supervillains used to run things, and then they got defeated, and now superheroes run everything, and the supervillains are kind of just living in an abandoned subway. There are two main characters, one of which I liked far more than the other. I much preferred Nova to Adrian, but overall I liked various aspects of this. I'd give it a 3 out of 5 stars, so it was very middling for me, but I think the end sort of saved it, and I'd be willing to pick up the next one to see how this sort of goes on. So yeah, if you want to hear more of my thoughts about it, you can watch me reading it in sort of real time over on the vlog I did for the Booktube games, because I read this one then. The next book that I picked up for the Booktube games was Gemina by Jay Kristoff and Amy Kaufman, and I loved it. No surprises there, 5 out of 5 stars. I will say that I didn't enjoy this book as much as I enjoyed the previous book in the series, and I think that is just because Illumine had like a little extra something that grasped me, while this book took about 200 pages of YA style build-up before it got to like the really investing parts. So while I enjoyed it, and I thought it was fun, I think that maybe if you trimmed out maybe 50 to 100 pages, I would have enjoyed it a lot more. Which is weird, because I still gave it 5 out of 5 stars, but I mean, like, after those initial 200 pages, the last 400 pages are like a ride, and I loved it, and I read it in like one day, so. The next book that I picked up was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie. My first Agatha Christie, and definitely not my last. I really enjoyed this one. I thought that the very simplistic style and the way that it was sort of set out, just sort of was really intriguing, and it just flows exactly the way I wanted it to. I've watched a couple Agatha Christie things. It's a thing that I do with my nana. So yeah, I'm kind of accustomed to like the format, and I just really like this one because it sort of just kept counting down, and the way that it ended was quite interesting as well. So if you don't know anything about this book, it is set on an island where 10 random strangers are brought together by a mysterious sort of person, and then they start dying one by one. It's an interesting premise, and I won't tell you any more about it because it's one that I was quite glad I went into without knowing too much about it. The next book that I read was a reread for me, and that was Ink Exchange by Melissa Marr. And this is from the Wicked Lovely series. It's the second book, and it's a urban fantasy YA book about fairies. And this one is centered on the Dark Court and its interaction with the Summer Court following the previous book. This is my favourite book in this series, and I love it. And I will just throw it out there that if you like The Darkling, then you're gonna like Iriel from this book. If you didn't like The Darkling, then you're probably not gonna like this book, because they're the same kind of trash bag, but Iriel has a... Does Iriel have more redeeming qualities? I don't know, but I love him all the same. I really like Leslie, and I really like Niall, and I really like Iriel, and it's like a trio of awesomeness there, and I just love them. Even though this book is love triangle-y, it works out. I really like this love triangle. I don't often like love triangles, but you know, it's kind of like a love triangle where all of the people like each other in a sort of way, so. I do have to throw a warning out here. Leslie is a rape victim, and that comes quite heavily in her storyline. It's mentioned quite a lot, so if that does trigger you in any way, probably don't read this one. The next book that I read is a graphic novel, and that was I Hate Fairyland Volume 2. This is about a girl who ventures into fairyland when she's a small child and then gets stuck there for 30 years. Though her body never ages, her mind does, and it's a mess. It's so bloody and so gross, but awesome. And a colour explosion. It's great. This one follows on very neatly from the previous book, and then goes on a whole different tangent, which I really enjoyed. I went through this so quickly, and yeah, definitely check it out if you're interested in very vibrant, very gory graphic novels. The last two books that I want to talk about in this part 1 video is The Last Guardian and Bloodstone by David Gemmell. Level Up David Gemmell. These are the second and third book in the John Shano series. The John Shano books are basically set in a world where the world has shifted on its axis after a cataclysmic event, and what was sea is now land, and what was land is now sea. It's a mix of fantasy and sci-fi and westerns, and also religion. It talks a lot about religion. The main character, John Shano, is also known as the Jerusalem Man because his main goal in life is to find Jerusalem. A portal world, Atlantis, the Titanic, even time travel. It's wonderful, and I think you should check this series out. I read the whole series once before when I was younger, and I don't think I really quite appreciated how much I would like these books. The end of the last book gets to me so hard. It's such a good end to something that has built up and built up throughout the series. I really like how Gemmell explores how religion can sort of affect a person's beliefs and morals, because John Shano he's like got his guns and he kills people. He tends to kill brigands and people who have hurt people, but he kills a lot of people. So he has his own demons, and he sort of tries to see what he should do better, and he has a whole lot of moral discussion in this. There's a lot of mention of the Bible, and I'm not a Christian. I'm not really a religious person at all, but I think it's a very interesting discussion of religion and how these different things rise up. So if you don't mind a bit of religion and you're interested in like sci-fi, western, fantasy sort of crossover, then you should definitely check this series out. So that is it for the first part of this wrap up, and yeah, I hope you weren't too bored by the mammoth amount of books that I read. Yay! If you like this video, please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!